Today we'll dive into a lot of charts, giving you guys some updates on some of the hottest tokens out there. It's going to be a good one. One of my fellow favorite traders out there is going to be coming in on the show, so don't miss it. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Joining me today, of course, is Mr. Gareth Soloway, coming over from verifiedinvesting.com. If you haven't visited his new website, jump over there right now. I just looked at it. You guys have spent some time and effort on getting this launched, so congrats.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, Gareth, let's get into a couple of the big news elements today. The first thing I want to hit on is kind of just the S&P. When you look at the S&P hitting 5,000, a lot of people looked at this and said, you know, maybe this is going to be a new renaissance in the history of the S&P and what it might mean for kind of those top 7 now, maybe top 6, 5, whatever it might look like. But the last time we really saw this amount of concentration in the top few stocks was really all the way back in the 1960s, which was a completely different makeup. When you look at the S&P right now, how comfortable are you with it continuing to climb?
No, I'm in the same boat, right? So I am very concerned about how thin the leadership has become. In fact, interestingly enough, we can see number one, this is the S&P 500 chart, and look at kind of how we're just getting tighter and tighter in this little wedge pattern. And again, that wedge pattern goes all the way back to basically the beginning of 2023. And so one of the things you have to be careful of is, you know, right now you're in a safe zone. This zone is safe between these two lines. But if we were to break below, that would start kickstarting algorithmic selling in the markets and also just people starting to take profits. And you could start to see a bigger pullback off of this level. On the other hand, if we break above this level, then you could get another leg up in the markets. But one of the concerns I have is that we have Apple even starting to not be a leader anymore, right? If we look at Apple, Apple's on this very pivotal technical trend line. If we zoom out, this goes back to 2023's low. And if this starts to break down, I mean, all of a sudden we've seen Microsoft still hitting new all-time highs, NVIDIA hitting new all-time highs, but some of the other big Magnificent Seven are not leading anymore. And if you look outside of that box, it's even thinner. You know, how many of the index or of the sectors within the S&P are even at new all-time highs? There's only one, which is the technology sector. So these are the types of things that keep me up at night in terms of the markets and saying, you know, let's be careful here. This is a market that is kind of hobbling still up, making new all-time highs, but you'd equate it to someone on one leg at this point with the other leg kind of you know, handicapped.
Well, and you're right. Tesla fell out of favor, I think, obviously, with the Magnificent Seven. It in itself is now not looking good. What does Tesla look like on your charts when you kind of chart this one out a bit? Because obviously the China sales numbers are down. We've started to see some things getting a little bit more heated between Elon and Tesla themselves. How do you think Tesla will, and can Tesla return back to the top of the S&P?
Yeah, so looking at the Tesla chart, I mean, we've had this beautiful channel to the downside, right? So you take the highs and connect the highs and then a perfectly parallel line. And so really, once we hit this low end, you expected a bounce. We have seen that bounce. At least on a very short-term basis, I expect us to go further to the upside to at least around 207 to 208. But again, I think you have to look at the bigger macro picture, which is China's in a big world of trouble right now. I'm sure you've covered all the stats coming out of there, how bad that economy is. And the question is, can the U.S. continue to stay strong enough to offset the issues here? One of the things I like to point out is if you look back here, the chart on Tesla back in 2020 and 2021 was basically, in my opinion, very much what we're seeing out of NVIDIA. You know, you look at the similarities. I mean, Tesla was the only game in town when it came to EV vehicles that were quality. I mean, yeah, you had a couple EVs, but what do they get? Like, you know, 50 miles to the charge, or 100 versus 300 for the Tesla vehicles. But now you have NVIDIA in that same sort of scenario where they're the only game in town, and thus price has just gone parabolic. But I do wonder, you know, there's hundreds of semiconductor companies that are eagerly waiting or going into production on AI chips. And you do have to wonder if the chips will become commoditized and profit margins will really start to slip. So these are the types of things that, again, you know, you look as a trader. I looked back at Cisco Systems back in 2000, and that was just an absolutely insane run, but very similar in terms of the bubbles that we've seen, right? Let's flip back and go all the way back to 2000. Look at that run, very similar to what we've seen on Nvidia or even on Tesla back then, because this was the only game in town for the backbone of the internet. And then obviously
Right.
what happened? Well, we saw every other company getting into that space because the margins were just so good. The profits were so good, and it really killed that sector. And believe it or not, Cisco's has not returned to those previous all-time highs ever, which is pretty remarkable.
Well, okay, this of course pushes us into crypto, and that is when you look at the amount of liquidity that's sitting on the sidelines, you also look at people saying, all right, there's less and less potential securities here to go into, and it becomes a little bit more risky. And I feel like if I'm going to weigh the risk, I got to look over at the hot narrative like Bitcoin ETFs. Now we've got Bitcoin ETFs accounting for 75% of new investments. With new market coming in, new money coming in, the likelihood of people seeing, a 50K run on Bitcoin now plus, maybe this is the time where new investment dollars do start to enter the market. What are your thoughts right now on Bitcoin? Are we seeing new numbers in the market right now that's causing a little bit of this push?
Yeah, so I think there definitely is some, right? We saw that 20% correction on Bitcoin right here where we had the fall after the spot ETF. That was kind of the letdown, right? The big news came out. Everyone said, okay. And then we saw GBTC having to unload a ton of their Bitcoin, which obviously put a damper on what was going into the other ETFs at the time. But that has now subsided. And we're seeing this resurgence where you have a risk-on environment in the stock market, new all-time highs. And Bitcoin obviously is a recipient of risk on as a risk asset. So I think as long as we see that risk on narrative in the markets continue, then Bitcoin can continue to go up. Now I am dabbling up in this range. You can see the trend line I have here on a little bit of a short. But again, remember for everyone out there watching, I'm a swing trader. So, we get a $5,000 pullback or a $3,000 pullback. I take my profits. I potentially even go long at the right levels. But again, I would say that, again, this move on Bitcoin is going to continue generally unless the stock market starts to really pull back. If you get a 20-30% pullback in the stock market, I would generally think that Bitcoin could be back at 30 to 32,000 from those current levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, so we're going to have to definitely remember that one because I'm kind of on the other camp. I feel like if the stock market starts to fall, we potentially could see a lot of people looking to these assets, maybe as mainly because of the narrative that Bitcoin now being a regulated asset on Wall Street with the biggest names out there. And if you look at the numbers here, Gareth, I was looking at this statement right here. This kind of blew me away a little bit. ETFs have increased to 2% of the total historical investment in Bitcoin in a month. That's 1 month. Now you've got the biggest names in the financial markets out here all vying for a position right now in terms of trying to be here at the right time for this next bull run and potentially either a soft landing or whatever kind of landing we get, being in the right place at the right time. Do you feel that this centralization of Bitcoin, especially around Wall Street, is going to continue to climb? BlackRock doesn't seem like they're slowing down in terms of acquisition.
No, and BlackRock, to be fair, I mean, their goal is to build this ETF where it's very profitable for them, right? I mean, that's the underlying narrative. You have to wonder if Larry Fink is really, does he really believe in Bitcoin, or he's just talking his book at this point as well? But I think that you're right. I mean, the longer term is, there's no doubt in my mind that Bitcoin goes up over the longer term. The scarcity aspect, the halvings, all these different factors, including the ability for regular folk to get in on the spot ETF and not risk getting their funds stolen out of an exchange that doesn't have FDIC insurance. So those are all positive narratives. But I also do worry that, if we look back in Bitcoin had, out of the last, let's see, let me put up my chart here so we can see exactly. So out of the last 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 days, Bitcoin was up every day except for the day that the stock market sold off. All right. So what that tells me is that there's still some factor there that is a risk asset in it. Now, again, does that slowly shift? Yes. In fact, I think it's already shifting. But I still think if you get panic in the equity markets, it would be hard to imagine that you wouldn't see a spillover into crypto just a little bit, especially the altcoins. I think the altcoins are more vulnerable than Bitcoin. But I do think at least you could see a potential spillover where you do see some sort of good, solid pullback in Bitcoin.
Interesting. Okay. I want to stay kind of on the crypto narrative here, and I want to talk about Coinbase. Obviously, a fairly aggressive move here. ARK, of course, has dumped another big market position into Coinbase. What are your thoughts on Coinbase right now continuing its climb?
Yeah, so and I'm a purely chart guy. So just looking at the charts here, a few things that kind of pique my interest. So what we're looking at, we have a top here at 186 on the chart. That's your resistance level, and we're getting very, very close to it, right? We're at 167 today, so that's a positive. Look at how the low on Coinbase right here. Look at how it basically aligned right with this former high. And again, that's the chart beauty. I love stuff like that, how it shows you that that was support and it actually held beautifully in terms of the bounce to the upside. Now, my only caveat to this is that, okay, so I think Coinbase has a great business model, but does the spot ETF, as it becomes more and more popular, do people start moving towards that, or do they still open Coinbase accounts? And again, I don't know the answer to that, but that would be something that I'd be concerned with. Also, fees, right? We know what the ETFs are charging. They're charging, what, 0.25% on the fees
Right.
in their ETFs. But if you go and make a purchase on Coinbase, I believe the fees are much, much higher. And does that then cause those fees, right? So eventually Coinbase is going to have to compete to get dollars and dollars to get turned into Bitcoin. Does that force their margins down significantly on the chart or on the price action, which would then cause the chart to fall based on valuation? So again, these are all question marks in my mind, right? Honestly, I don't know. I do have the levels, right? We know 186 is resistance, and then 114, 115 is support.
Yeah.
But again, in the bigger picture, what are the fees on those? And does Coinbase have to start competing when they charge their fees?
Well, the likelihood, obviously, we're going to see a lot of activity in the altcoin market, especially when you look at just the power of where Ethereum is, which we'll talk about next. But also just the gaming sector, we're starting to see real world assets starting to move into some other, assets out there, all the way into oracles, et cetera, of what we've seen. Now you're getting into a lot of these narratives that are also playing out in AI, in cloud compute, in DePIN, all of which do well on places like Coinbase, and especially in when you get into decentralized finance, that's a little bit more stronger as well. So I think that's one of the things that could hold up Coinbase in the future. But I do agree with you; they got to drop their rates a little bit to be able to be a bit more competitive, especially with the ETFs. Going over to Ethereum, Ethereum is strengthening its momentum, flagging its Bitcoin right now ran 45 to 52. Momentum right now will shift from Ethereum when Bitcoin consolidates and calms down. If you're looking at Bitcoin right now and you feel like there's going to be a consolidation zone, where do you think it would be? Will it hover around the 52K mark, or do you think there's another window here?
Yeah, so right now I'm looking at that 52K area as being very significant on the Bitcoin chart, and flipping over to the chart again. So this trend line is a big one for me, kind of keeping an eye on this 52. We almost touched 53,000 today. I want to see if this line can get broken. If we break this line at 52.5 to 53, 57 is probably your next big target zone on Bitcoin. So I think that would be something to keep an eye on. But you brought up Ethereum, and let's take a look at that chart, because you've had this beautiful long-term channel on Ethereum, right? So, and I can even get rid of some of these lines to just kind of show the beauty of it. But this goes back all the way to 2022, the lows, and you could see the highs, and these two lines are perfectly parallel. The kicker here is that Ethereum is beginning to push above that range. And again, above this range, if we can hold above, let's say for 2 or 3 days here, I think you probably head towards 3,000 on the Ethereum chart, and then potentially even higher. And I think I saw one of your potential targets was like 3,500. That would be this pivot high at just above 3,500, and that's not out of the realm for Ethereum in terms of playing catch up to what we've seen out of Bitcoin and some alts. I mean, again, if you look at the runs in Solana or some of these other ones, really Ethereum has lagged substantially on that percentage type move. So it's definitely a possibility that this is going to catch fire. The other thing I'll say too is if we start hearing that narrative of spot ETF again, that would be another catalyst for Ethereum here in the near term.
Yeah, I like Ethereum, especially going above 3K soon, mainly because we've continued to watch the sentiment on this, and sentiment has been trending up really all the way back into January, to where it's really flying pretty high right now above this 2,500 mark, and we've continued to see a lot of strength right there. So this is the one I'm watching for sure. I want to jump over to Solana real quick and take a look. So can Solana come in and start to pressure this 140 mark, which is where a lot of people are looking to right now? It's holding it around 116, 115. What are your thoughts on Sol?
Yeah, Sol's in a really interesting chart, right? So it had such incredible momentum here. This is my favorite trend line on Solana, right? It goes back to October of 2023, and what we see is the price deviates and gets above, and then comes back, gets above, comes back, continues to kind of retest this upsloping trend line, but doesn't bounce until that final blow off top here.
Mhm.
And then we came down, we hit the line a few times from the other side, but then broke through. But look at what's happening now. As we come up, we hit that line, pulled back, hit it here, pause, pierced it yesterday, but now we're seeing a little bit of a sell-off today. So
Yeah.
again, as this line goes up, you're starting to get closer to that high, that 52-week high. And again, to me, this area becomes really key. If it can't really get above this upsloping trend line, it's vulnerable, at least, and we're talking near term here. I actually think Solana has a very, very rosy future, but just in terms of near-term price action, this area right here, which is currently around 116, is huge for Solana. If it gets through 116, it should retest 126, and then that's the question, can it break through that level if it retests that 126 level?
Yeah, I've got Solana being a little bit softer as well. Is sentiment on this right now deviating away from what we've seen on a pretty good upside track, which is kind of led it to where it positions right now. But it is starting to deviate in terms of just general sentiment on social around Solana as a whole. So I would agree with you. I think there might be some potential downside here for Sol. Let's take a look at Chainlink, because there has been quite a bit in terms of news with Chainlink, and we are starting to see utilization, utility, I should say, much more in terms of Chainlink itself. Do you like Chainlink, or is it, I mean, many people are looking at Pyth as an alternative. There's some other plays out there that could get into this. What are your thoughts?
So just being purely on the chart side, one of the things we saw was this beautiful channel that we kept on, jumping from highs to lows. But look, we've now taken out that channel to the upside and are now consolidating a little bit. So as long as we stay above this line, you would continue to have a bullish bias on this chart. The one thing I would look at here is what's called a measured move on the move price, right? So if we take this low here to this high, we get about a $9.30 move, $9.40 move.
Yeah.
And the idea is if we continue up, where does that take us? And it would take us right up to, and I might see if I can get up that high on this chart, and I'll have to shrink it down a little bit. But this would take us to about $22 to $23 as a target price. So I do think that as long as you stay above this yellow line, I think you continue to keep that bullish bias within the scope of Chainlink. But then if it gets to about 22 to 23, that might be an exhaustion level per the chart.
Okay, well, that'll be this will be one to watch, I think, for sure, because this has been a very popular token, I think, with a lot of traders, and continues to be. I want to go into our last token, and that is Polygon, Matic. You look at Polygon, they're starting to make, I think, some technical advances now in Layer 2 for Ethereum. This could be a big breakthrough for them. In that, when you look at narratives, it's very solid right now. And of course, right now, the price is actually starting to show it. So what are your thoughts on Polygon?
Yeah, the chart is starting to show a little bit of a bullish bias here, right? So we've continued to move up here. We could see, again, we've kind of had that same sort of sideways chop of consolidation. There was even a head and shoulders here, but it never really triggered before starting to move back to the upside. The only thing I would just mention to traders, so there's a couple levels. We obviously have the recent high up here around $1.05 to $1.07. That's going to be resistance, right? That's a place where there were a lot of buyers coming in. They thought this thing was going to go parabolic when Solana was going parabolic, and then they kind of got left holding the bag. So there will be some sellers up in that range. But the other level to just keep an eye on here is this level here. Notice this high is essentially equal to this, which is equal to that. So to get to that high of 105 to 107, we have to get through the 95 level right here. And that'll be the level to watch now in the coming days as the bullishness continues to kind of permeate crypto. Can it get to 95? And if it gets to 95, can it push through? Then you have that shot of retesting the 52-week high over here and potentially breaking out.
Yeah, I was looking at just the price action indicator here on Luxalgo, and I would agree. I think you're right in the sense of that 95 being a really interesting spot right now for Matic going forward. So definitely one to watch. Again, I always love to find out what our audience likes, so make sure and drop some comments down below if you guys like these kinds of trading sessions when we bring Gareth on. let us know. We always like those. And make sure and subscribe to the channel right now. And if you have not visited Verified Investing, go over to verifiedinvesting.com. You can learn more about what Gareth's doing. So Gareth, it's always good to have you on the show, man. Thanks for stopping in. We appreciate it.
Love talking to you, man. We always have great discussions. So thank you for having me.
All right, you bet. Okay, you guys are not in the Diamond Circle. We're finding out right now that about 30% of you that watch our shows here every day, every week, are not subscribed and or have not committed to the Diamond Circle. That's the best thing to do, is to jump in and get more alpha and, of course, a lot more insights on what we do here on the show that sometimes we don't bring in here to the YouTube channel. So make sure and do that. Of course, you can reach me out there on X, @Paul Barron. Catch you next time right here on TechPath.